The emergency room at Walter Reed Medical Center buzzed with the controlled chaos that Doctor had grown accustomed to over his 15 years as a trauma surgeon. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the sterile white walls, and the constant beeping of monitors created a symphony of urgency that never seemed to end. Moved between patients with practiced efficiency, his scrubs already stained from a 12-hour shift that showed no signs of slowing down. It was just past midnight when the ambulance sirens pierced through the night air, growing louder as they approached the hospital. Barely looked up from the chart he was reviewing when the automatic doors burst open, revealing two paramedics wheeling in a patient on a gurney. The woman appeared to be in her early 30s, her long dark hair matted with blood, and her clothes torn and dirty as if she had been in some kind of accident. "What do we have?" asked, following the gurney into Trauma Bay 3 while pulling on fresh gloves. "Jane Doe, approximately 32 years old," reported the lead paramedic, a stocky man with graying hair. "Found unconscious in an alley downtown. Multiple contusions, possible concussion, and what appears to be a dislocated shoulder. Vitals are stable, but she's been in and out of consciousness during transport." Nodded, immediately beginning his assessment as the nurses transferred the woman to the hospital bed. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and when he checked her pupils, they responded normally to light. The injuries were concerning but not life-threatening from what he could see. What struck him most was how she carried herself, even unconscious. There was something about her posture, the way her muscles seemed coiled even in sleep, that reminded him of his own training days. Before joining the medical field, had served 8 years as a Navy SEAL medic, deployed multiple times to Afghanistan and Iraq. The transition from battlefield medicine to civilian trauma surgery had been challenging, but his military background gave him a unique perspective on treating wounded warriors. He had seen enough combat injuries to recognize certain patterns, certain signs that civilians rarely displayed. As he examined the woman more closely, small details began to stand out. Her hands, despite being bruised and scraped, showed calluses in specific places, the kind that came from years of weapons training and rope work. Her fingernails were cut short and practical, and there was a faded tan line on her ring finger where a wedding band might have been. Most telling were the scars he discovered as the nurses cut away her damaged clothing to assess her injuries. A jagged scar ran along her left, clearly from some kind of blade. Another, more recent mark on her upper arm looked like a bullet graze that had healed within the last few months. But it was the small, precise scars on her hands and forearms that really caught his attention. They were the kind of marks that came from close-quarters combat training, from learning to fight with knives and survive in hostile environments. "Doctor, should we run a standard tox screen?" asked Sarah, one of the trauma nurses who had worked with for several years. "Yes, but also check for any military identification. Dog tags, ID cards, anything that might tell us who she is," replied, continuing his examination. "And get me a full body X-ray series. I want to see if there are any old fractures or metal fragments." The woman stirred slightly as examined her dislocated shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, and he caught a glimpse of sharp green eyes that seemed to take in everything around her in a single sweep. It was the kind of situational awareness that was drilled into special operations personnel. She assessed the room, the people, and potential threats in less than 3 seconds before her eyes closed again. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" asked gently, leaning closer. "You're in a hospital, you're safe, we're going to take good care of you." Her lips moved slightly, but no words came out. Noticed that even in her injured state, she had positioned her arms in a way that would allow her to defend herself if necessary. It was subtle, but unmistakable to someone with his background. The X-rays came back within an hour and studied them carefully in the small viewing room adjacent to the trauma bay. What he saw confirmed his growing suspicions. The woman's skeleton told a story of violence and survival. There were evidence of multiple old fractures that had healed perfectly, the kind of medical care that suggested military hospital treatment. Her ribs showed signs of breaks that had been professionally set, and there was a small titanium plate in her left leg, probably from an IED blast based on the fracture pattern. Most interesting was what appeared to be a small metal fragment near her shoulder blade. It was too small and too well-positioned to cause any problems, but it looked like shrapnel that had been deemed too risky to remove surgically. Had seen similar cases in soldiers who had survived explosive attacks. Dr. Sarah appeared in the doorway. "The police are here. They want to ask some questions about our Jane Doe." Turned to see 2 detectives waiting in the hallway. The older one, a tall man with silver hair, introduced himself as Detective. His partner was a younger woman named Detective who carried herself with the alert posture of someone accustomed to danger. "We found her in an alley behind Murphy's bar on 5th Street, Detective explained. "Looks like she might have been mugged or assaulted. The area has seen an uptick in violent crime lately. Any idea when she might be conscious enough to answer questions?" Considered his response carefully. Something about this situation didn't feel right. If the woman had simply been mugged, why were her injuries so specific? Why did she have the scars and conditioning of someone with extensive combat training? "She has a concussion, so it might be several hours before she's coherent enough to give a statement," replied diplomatically. "I'll let you know when she's ready to talk." The detectives left their cards and departed, but couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. He returned to the trauma bay where the woman was now resting more peacefully. The nursing staff had cleaned her wounds and set her dislocated shoulder, and she was hooked up to monitors that showed her vital signs were improving steadily. Pulled up a chair beside her bed and began documenting his findings in her medical chart. As he wrote, he couldn't help but think about his own journey from the battlefield to the hospital. The transition hadn't been easy. The skills that kept you alive in combat didn't always translate well to civilian life. The hypervigilance, the constant assessment of threats, the difficulty trusting people, it all took a toll. Around 3 in the morning, the woman's eyes opened again. This time she seemed more alert, though still disoriented. Was reviewing lab results at the nurse's station when Sarah called him over. "She's awake, doctor, and she's asking for water." Approached the bed slowly, not wanting to startle her. Up close, he could see that her eyes were sharp and intelligent, constantly moving to assess her surroundings. When she saw him approaching, she tensed slightly, and he noticed her good hand inch toward the edge of the bed where she might be able to grab something to defend herself with. "Easy there," said in a calm, non-threatening voice. You're in Walter Reed Medical Center. You were found injured and brought here for treatment. Can you tell me your name?" The woman studied his face for a long moment before responding. She began, then stopped, her brow furrowed as if she was trying to remember something important. "I don't. Where exactly am I?" "You're in Washington, D.C. at Walter Reed," repeated. "It's Tuesday night or early Wednesday morning now. Do you remember what happened to you?" She closed her eyes and was quiet for so long that wondered if she had fallen asleep again. When she opened them, there was something different in her expression. More guarded, more careful. "I remember darkness and pain, but before that," she shook her head slightly. "It's all fuzzy." Had seen this before in soldiers who had experienced traumatic events. Sometimes the mind protected itself by blocking out memories that were too painful or dangerous to process immediately. "That's okay," he said gently. "Head injuries can cause temporary memory problems. Sometimes things come back gradually. What's the last thing you remember clearly?" The woman was quiet again, but could see her thinking hard, trying to piece together fragments of memory. "I remember. A hotel room, getting ready for something, but I can't remember what." "Do you remember your name?" "Sarah," she said after a moment. "Sarah Mitchell, I think." Made a note in her chart, though something about the way she had said it made him think she wasn't entirely certain. "Okay, Sarah, I'm going to be honest with you about your injuries. You have a concussion, some bruising, and your shoulder was dislocated, but we've taken care of that. Overall, you're going to be fine, but I am curious about some of the scars we found when we were treating you." Her eyes immediately became more alert, more wary. "What kind of scars?" "The kind that suggest you might have military training," said carefully. "I served 8 years as a Navy SEAL before I became a doctor. I recognize certain patterns of injury." Sarah stared at him for a long moment and could see her processing this information. She seemed to be weighing whether to trust him with whatever truth she was hiding. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. Nodded, deciding not to push the issue. "That's fine. Like I said, memory issues are common with head injuries. The important thing right now is that you rest and recover." But as he turned to leave, Sarah called out to him, "Doctor." "Yes. Thank you for taking care of me." There was something in her voice, a depth of gratitude that went beyond what most patients expressed for routine medical care. It was the kind of thanks that came from someone who had experienced genuine life-or-death situations before. Over the next few hours, found himself checking on Sarah more frequently than was strictly necessary. Each time he visited, he noticed new details that reinforced his suspicions about her background. The way she slept, for instance, always positioned so she could see the door, never fully relaxed even while unconscious. When nurses approached her bed, she would wake instantly, fully alert, ready to react to any threat. During his morning rounds, brought her breakfast and sat down to chat while she ate. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," Sarah said, though she winced as she shifted position. "When can I leave?" "Well, I'd like to keep you for observation for at least another day. Concussions can be unpredictable, and I want to make sure there are no complications." Sarah nodded, but could see she was uncomfortable with the idea of staying. In his experience, that was another sign of military training. Hospitals and medical facilities were vulnerable places where you couldn't control your environment or protect yourself effectively. "Sarah, I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me," said after she had finished eating. "Are you in some kind of danger? Is there a reason you seem so concerned about staying here?" Her hand paused halfway to setting down her water cup. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you sleep like someone who expects to be attacked. You assess every person who comes into this room like they might be a threat. And those scars, they tell a story of someone who has seen combat." Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the gray morning sky. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "If I tell you something, doctor-patient confidentiality means you can't share it with anyone, right?" "Within limits, yes. Unless you're planning to harm yourself or someone else, or if there's evidence of certain types of crimes, what you tell me stays between us." Sarah took a deep breath. I think I'm in trouble, big trouble, and I can't remember exactly why or how, but I know that staying here too long isn't safe, for me or for anyone else." Felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of trouble, Sarah?" She looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time since she had been brought in, he saw genuine fear there. Not the fear of pain or injury, but the fear of someone who knew they were being hunted. "The kind where people don't get second chances," she said quietly. Before could respond, there was a commotion in the hallway outside. Loud voices, heavy footsteps, and what sounded like people in a hurry. Sarah's entire body went rigid, and her good hand moved instinctively toward where a weapon might have been if she were armed. "Get down," she whispered urgently too, but he was already moving toward the door to see what was happening. Through the small window in the door, he could see several men in dark suits moving purposefully through the hospital corridor. They weren't doctors or hospital security. They moved with the coordinated efficiency of a tactical team, and they seemed to be checking rooms systematically. Turned back to Sarah, but the bed was empty. Despite her injuries, she had somehow managed to get up and move to a position behind the door where she wouldn't be visible to anyone looking in from the hallway. "They're not police, are they?" asked quietly. Sarah shook her head. "If they find me here, people are going to get hurt, good people who are just trying to do their jobs." The footsteps were getting closer. Could hear them checking the room next door, asking questions of the nurses. In a few moments, they would be at Sarah's room. Made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. "There's a service elevator at the end of this corridor. If we can get there without being seen, I can get you out of the hospital." Sarah looked at him with surprise. "Why would you help me? You don't even know who I am." "Because I know what it's like to serve your country and then find yourself in an impossible situation," replied. "And because I took an oath to do no harm. Letting whoever those men are take you feels like it would violate that oath." The footsteps had stopped right outside their door. Could see shadows moving under the gap at the bottom of the door. Sarah looked like she was preparing to fight, despite her injuries and the fact that she was wearing nothing but a hospital gown. Moved quickly to his supply cabinet and pulled out a set of scrubs. "Put these on, fast." As Sarah struggled into the scrubs with her injured shoulder, grabbed a wheelchair and helped her into it. He threw a blanket over her legs and put a surgical mask over her face. "Just act like you're sedated," he whispered. "I'm going to wheel you out like you're being transferred for tests." The door handle turned just as positioned himself behind the wheelchair. When the door opened, two men in expensive suits entered the room. They were both tall and muscular, with the kind of alertness that suggested military or intelligence backgrounds. "Excuse me," one of them said too. "We're looking for a patient who was brought in last night. A woman, approximately 32 years old, found in an alley downtown." kept his voice steady and professional. "I'm sorry, but I can't discuss patient information with unauthorized personnel. If you're law enforcement, you'll need to speak with hospital administration and provide proper credentials." The man reached into his jacket and tensed, but he only pulled out what looked like an official identification badge. "We're with a federal task force. This is a matter of national security." "Even so, I need you to follow proper procedures," replied. "Hospital security can escort you to the appropriate office where you can make your request through official channels." The second man had moved to examine the empty hospital bed while his partner talked too. He ran his hand over the sheets, checking if they were still warm. "Where are you taking this patient?" the first man asked, nodding toward Sarah in the wheelchair. "Radiology for an MRI," said. "Scheduled 30 minutes ago, actually, so we're running late." The man studied Sarah's face, but the surgical mask and her apparent unconsciousness seemed to satisfy him. "How long will that take?" "Could be several hours depending on what they find," replied. "These neurological cases can be complex." After what felt like an eternity, the men left the room to continue their search. Waited until he couldn't hear their footsteps anymore, then quickly wheeled Sarah toward the service elevator. His heart was pounding, and he could feel sweat beating on his forehead despite the hospital's air conditioning. They made it to the elevator without being spotted and used his key card to access the basement level. Once the doors closed, Sarah pulled off the surgical mask and looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "You have no idea what you just did," she said quietly. "Maybe not," replied. "But I know what felt right, and right now getting you somewhere safe feels like the right thing to do." As the elevator descended, realized that his quiet life as a trauma surgeon had just become infinitely more complicated. Whatever Sarah Mitchell was running from, he was now part of it. And deep down, despite the danger and uncertainty, he felt more alive than he had in years. The basement of Walter Reed Medical Center was a maze of maintenance tunnels and storage areas that most staff never saw. Had discovered these passages during his residency when he would sometimes come down here to think during particularly stressful shifts. Now, they might be the key to getting Sarah out of the hospital without being detected. "Where does this lead?" Sarah asked as guided the wheelchair through a narrow corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits. "There's an exit near the loading dock," explained. "It's not monitored by the main security system because it's primarily used for maintenance and deliveries." As they moved through the basement, couldn't help but notice how Sarah's demeanor had changed. Gone was the confusion and vulnerability she had displayed in the hospital room. Now she seemed focused and determined, constantly checking their surroundings and listening for any sounds that might indicate pursuit. "Sarah," said quietly as they approached the exit, "before we go any further, I need to know what I'm getting myself into. Those men weren't just federal agents, were they?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. "No, they weren't, and my name isn't really Sarah Mitchell." Stopped pushing the wheelchair. "Then who are you?" She turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw the weight of secrets and burdens that went far beyond anything a simple assault victim would carry. "My real name is Lieutenant Commander," she said quietly. "I was a Navy SEAL, part of a classified unit that operated in places the government would prefer to forget, and 3 days ago I discovered something that some very powerful people would kill to keep secret." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Lieutenant Commander. The name carried weight, even though he had never heard it before. In the special operations community, some names were whispered in reverent tones. Others were buried so deep that they became legends. Looking at now, realized he was in the presence of someone whose story belonged in the latter category. "Navy SEAL," repeated slowly, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. "That explains the scars, the way you carry yourself, the reaction to potential threats." Nodded grimly. "I served 12 years before my unit was officially disbanded 6 months ago. Unofficially, we never existed in the first place." They had reached the maintenance exit and could hear the sound of delivery trucks moving around the loading dock above them. He helped out of the wheelchair, noting how she favored her injured shoulder, but moved with the fluid grace of someone whose body was a finely tuned weapon despite her recent injuries. "What did you discover that has federal agents hunting you through a hospital?" asked as he checked the exit door. "And why didn't you just go to your chain of command with whatever information you found?" The look gave him was filled with bitter irony. Because my chain of command is exactly who I discovered the information about. Felt a chill run down his spine. In his years as a SEAL medic, he had seen corruption and cover-ups, but they were usually small-scale affairs involving individual soldiers or maybe a single unit. What was suggesting sounded much larger and more dangerous. "We need to move," said, checking her watch. "Those men in suits won't be fooled by the MRI story for long. Once they realize I'm not in radiology, they'll start checking security footage and expanding their search." Opened the exit door carefully, checking to make sure the loading dock area was clear. The early morning air was crisp and carried the smell of diesel fuel from the delivery trucks. Several hospital staff members were moving equipment and supplies, but none of them paid any attention to two people in medical scrubs emerging from a maintenance entrance. "My car is in the staff parking garage," said. "Level 3, Section B, can you make it that far?" Tested her injured shoulder, rotating it slightly and wincing at the pain. "I'll manage, but once we leave this hospital together, you become a target too. These people don't leave loose ends." Had been thinking about exactly that during their escape through the basement. His life as a trauma surgeon was comfortable and predictable. He had a nice apartment, a successful career, and the respect of his colleagues. Helping escape would put all of that at risk, and possibly much more. But as he looked at her standing there in ill-fitting scrubs, injured and alone, facing enemies with seemingly unlimited resources, he thought about the oath he had taken both as a doctor and as a SEAL. Some situations transcended personal safety. Some fights were worth joining regardless of the personal cost. "Then we better make sure we're very careful about how we handle this," said, leading the way toward the parking garage. They moved through the hospital complex with the casual efficiency of medical personnel going about their daily routine. Had grabbed a clipboard and some files from the basement storage area and carried herself like a resident following an attending physician on rounds. To any casual observer, they looked completely normal. The parking garage was busier than it hoped, with the morning shift change bringing dozens of medical staff to work. But the activity also provided cover, allowing them to blend in with the crowd of tired-looking doctors and nurses heading to and from their vehicles. His car was a practical sedan, several years old but well-maintained. As they approached it, suddenly grabbed his arm and pulled him behind a concrete pillar. "What is it?" whispered. Pointed toward his car. Two men in dark suits were standing near it, one of them speaking into a radio while the other examined the license plate. They weren't the same men who had searched hospital room, which meant this operation involved more personnel than had initially realized. "They found your car fast," observed grimly. "That means they have access to hospital personnel records, parking registrations, probably real-time security camera feeds too." Felt his stomach drop. The scope of resources these people had access to was becoming clear, and it was far beyond what any normal law enforcement operation would possess. "So what do we do now?" asked. "My apartment will probably be watched too, along with my credit cards and bank accounts." Was studying the layout of the parking garage, nodding exit routes and sight lines with the tactical awareness of someone trained in urban warfare. "We need transportation they can't track, cash they can't monitor, and a place to lay low while we figure out our next move." "I might have an idea about transportation," said, remembering something. "There's a doctor I know who keeps a motorcycle here. He's been trying to sell it for months because his wife hates the thing. He leaves the keys hidden in the storage compartment because he's hoping someone will just take it and solve his marital problem." Raised an eyebrow. "You want to steal a motorcycle from your colleague?" "Borrow," corrected. "I'll leave him money and a note explaining that it was a medical emergency." They made their way to the opposite side of the garage where Doctor kept his vintage. His knowledge of motorcycles became apparent as she examined the bike with professional interest. "This will work," she said, finding the hidden keys exactly where had said they would be. "It's old enough that it doesn't have GPS tracking and powerful enough to get us out of the city quickly." Left an envelope with $5,000 in cash and a brief note in his locker, using the emergency access code that all senior staff knew in case of genuine emergencies. As they prepared to leave the garage, suddenly grabbed his arm again. "Wait, before we go anywhere, I need to tell you more about what we're dealing with. You deserve to know what you're risking your life for." They sat on a bench in a quiet corner of the garage and began to tell her story. Her voice was calm and professional, but could hear the pain and betrayal underlying her words. 6 months ago, my unit was tasked with a recovery mission in Eastern Europe. We were told that a high-value intelligence asset needed extraction from a hostile situation. Standard stuff, the kind of mission we had run dozens of times before. Listened intently, drawing on his own experience with classified operations to understand the context was providing. The target was a scientist named Doctor, continued. According to our briefing, he was a Russian biochemist who had been working on defensive countermeasures for chemical weapons. He wanted to defect and bring his research with him to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. But that wasn't really what was happening, guessed. Shook her head. Wasn't defecting. He was being kidnapped, and his research wasn't defensive. He had developed something called binary storm, a chemical weapon that could be deployed in two harmless-seeming components that only became lethal when mixed in the human body. Felt a chill of understanding. Chemical weapons research was banned by international treaty, and the implications of what was describing were staggering. My unit successfully extracted, and his research continued. We brought him back to a safe house in Berlin, where we were supposed to hand him over to CIA personnel for debriefing and resettlement. But something went wrong, said. I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear, explained. The CIA team leader was on the phone with someone, discussing how research would be invaluable for future operations, and how they needed to eliminate any witnesses to the true nature of the acquisition. Understood immediately. They weren't rescuing a defector, they were stealing chemical weapons research for offensive use. And they planned to kill once they had everything they needed from him, confirmed, along with anyone who knew the truth about what we had really done. The weight of situation was becoming clear too. She hadn't just stumbled across routine corruption or misconduct. She had uncovered evidence of war crimes being committed by her own government, using her unit as unwitting accomplices. What did you do? Asked. I tried to contact my commanding officer to report what I had heard, said. But when I called the secure line, I got transferred to the same CIA team leader who had been discussing execution. Could imagine the moment of terrible realization must have experienced. Your chain of command was part of the operation. Not just part of it, they were running it. My entire unit, everything we thought we were doing to serve our country, had been turned into a black ops kidnapping and murder squad. His voice remained steady, but could see the profound sense of betrayal in her eyes. For someone who had dedicated their life to serving their country with honor, discovering that they had been manipulated into committing atrocities would be devastating. So you tried to get out, said. Nodded. I managed to warn him, and we escaped from the Berlin safe house together. But they had resources everywhere. Private military contractors, corrupt officials, even some legitimate law enforcement who thought they were helping capture dangerous fugitives. Where is now? Asked. Was quiet for a long moment. He didn't make it. We were ambushed 3 days ago in Prague. Was killed, but not before he gave me something that proves everything. Documentation of the binary storm research, recorded conversations with his American handlers, evidence of the planned elimination protocol. Realized they were talking about information that could bring down high-ranking officials in multiple government agencies. The kind of evidence that people would indeed kill to suppress. This is bigger than just corruption or cover-ups, said. This could expose illegal weapons programs, war crimes, maybe even conspiracy at the highest levels of government. Which is why they're hunting me with unlimited resources, replied, and why anyone who helps me becomes a target too. As if summoned by her words, the sound of footsteps echoed through the parking garage. Multiple sets of feet, moving with purpose and coordination, and crouched behind the parked cars, watching as a tactical team spread out through the garage. These weren't the suited agents from the hospital. These men wore black tactical gear and moved with the precision of military special operations personnel. They carried advanced weapons and communication equipment, and they were conducting a systematic search of the entire garage. How many people are they willing to deploy to find you? Whispered. However many it takes, replied grimly. Binary Storm isn't just another weapons program. In the wrong hands, it could kill millions of people without leaving any trace of chemical weapons use. The components look like common industrial chemicals until they're combined in living tissue. felt sick as the full implications hit him. They weren't just running from corrupt officials trying to cover up misconduct. They were being hunted by people who had access to weapons of mass destruction and were willing to use any means necessary to protect their secret. The tactical team was getting closer, checking each row of parked vehicles with professional thoroughness, was studying their movement patterns, and could see her calculating distances and timing. "When I give the signal, we need to get to that motorcycle and get out of here fast," whispered. "They're good, but they're following standard urban search protocols. That gives us about a 30-second window when their sight lines are blocked." Felt his heart pounding as they prepared to make their escape. His hands were shaking slightly, and he realized this was the first time since leaving the military that he had faced genuine life-or-death danger. Said quietly, "Once we start that motorcycle, there's no going back. Are you sure you want to do this?" Thought about his comfortable life, his successful career, his safe and predictable future. Then he thought about Doctor, killed for trying to prevent his research from being used to murder innocent people. He thought about the ethical principles that had guided his decisions both as a SEAL and as a doctor. "I'm sure," said. Smiled for the first time since he had met her. "Then let's go save the world." The next 30 seconds were a blur of controlled chaos. Moved with the fluid precision of her special operations training, leading through the maze of parked cars while staying just ahead of the searching tactical team. When they reached Doctor's motorcycle, had it started and moving almost before had finished climbing on behind her. The sound of this engine echoing through the parking garage immediately attracted attention. Heard shouts behind them as the tactical team converged on their position, but was already accelerating toward the garage exit. They burst out of the parking garage into the bright morning sunlight just as heard the distinctive crack of suppressed rifle fire behind them. The shots were precise and professional, intended to disable the motorcycle rather than kill its riders, but the message was clear. These people were willing to use deadly force in the middle of a hospital complex to capture. Guided the motorcycle through the busy streets of Washington with the skill of someone who had conducted vehicle operations in hostile urban environments. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, taking a complex route that would make them difficult to follow or track. As they put distance between themselves and Walter Reed Medical Center, found himself holding tightly to and wondering what exactly he had gotten himself into. Behind them, he could see black SUVs emerging from various directions, beginning what he suspected would be a city-wide manhunt. Leaned back slightly and shouted over the engine noise, "We need to get out of DC completely. They'll lock down the city if they have to." "Where are we going?" shouted back. "Somewhere they won't expect," replied. "Somewhere I can contact people who might still be trustworthy." As they rode through the streets of the nation's capital, pursued by government agents with unlimited resources and deadly intentions, realized that his quiet life as a trauma surgeon was officially over. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back to his comfortable routine. But seeing the determination in her posture despite her injuries and the overwhelming odds against them, felt something he hadn't experienced since his military days. A sense of purpose that went beyond personal comfort or safety. A chance to make a difference in a fight that truly mattered. The motorcycle roared as accelerated onto the highway leading out of Washington, carrying them toward an uncertain future but away from certain death. Behind them, the city was already mobilizing resources to find them. But for the moment, they were free. And for the moment, that was enough. The abandoned farmhouse sat on 40 acres of overgrown Maryland countryside, hidden from the main road by thick woods and accessible only by a dirt track that was barely visible through the weeds. Had guided them there after 3 hours of careful driving, taking back roads and avoiding highways where surveillance cameras might track their movement. The motorcycle was now hidden in an old barn, covered by moldy hay and rusted farm equipment that hadn't been used in decades. Sat on a broken wooden crate in what had once been the farmhouse kitchen, watching work with tools she had somehow acquired during their journey. She had broken into a small-town electronics store leaving money, but taking what she needed, and was now assembling what looked like a sophisticated communications device from seemingly random components. "How do you know about this place?" asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them as worked. "Safe house," replied without looking up from her work. "My unit established dozens of them over the years. Places where we could disappear if operations went wrong or if we needed to conduct sensitive surveillance. Looked around the dilapidated farmhouse with its peeling wallpaper and broken windows. Doesn't look very safe to me. Glanced up and almost smiled. The best safe houses never do. The goal isn't comfort, it's invisibility. This place has been abandoned for 15 years, but it has clean water from a well, a generator in the basement that actually works, and most importantly, it doesn't exist in any government database. As she spoke, made final adjustments to her improvised communication device. The contraption looked like something out of a spy movie, with multiple antennas and screens that flickered to life as she powered it up. "Who are you trying to contact?" asked. "Someone who might still be clean," said, her fingers flying over a modified keyboard. "When my unit was disbanded, most of the personnel were reassigned or retired. But there was one guy, Staff Sergeant Jake, who always seemed to know what was really going on behind the scenes." The name sounded familiar, too, though he couldn't place where he might have heard it before. "Was our intelligence specialist," continued. "If anyone could help us figure out how deep this conspiracy goes and who we can trust, it would be him." His device beeped softly, and encrypted text began scrolling across one of the screens. Watched as she entered complex passwords and navigated through what appeared to be multiple security protocols. "Jake, are you there?" typed. For several minutes, nothing happened. Found himself holding his breath, wondering if they were walking into a trap or if contact had been compromised like everyone else in her chain of command. Then slowly, a response appeared on the screen. "Jesus Christ, we thought you were dead. Where the hell are you?" Shoulders relaxed slightly at the familiar tone of his response. "Safe for now, but not for long. Jake, I need to know who I can trust. The Prague operation was a setup." "I know," came the immediate reply. "I've been trying to figure out what happened to you for 3 days. Half the intelligence community is looking for you, and they're not planning on bringing you in alive." Leaned closer to read the conversation, feeling a chill at confirmation of what they already suspected. Typed quickly, "How deep does this go? Is it just CIA Black Ops, or is it bigger?" There was a long pause before responded. "You've stumbled into something that goes to the very top. Binary Storm isn't just a rogue weapons program. It's part of something called Operation Silent Sky." His face went pale as she read the response. "What's Operation Silent Sky?" she typed. "A plan to use Binary Storm as a false flag weapon," replied. "Deploy it against civilian targets, blame it on terrorists or foreign governments, then use the public outrage to justify massive expansion of military and intelligence budgets." Felt sick as the implications hit him. They weren't just dealing with corrupt officials stealing weapons research. They were looking at a conspiracy to commit mass murder for political and financial gain. "How many people are involved?" typed. "Too many," replied. "Defense contractors, politicians, military leadership, intelligence agencies. We're talking about a network that has billions of dollars in contracts at stake." Stared at the screen for a long moment before typing her next question. "Jake, can you get us evidence? Something that would expose the whole operation." "Maybe," replied, "but it would be incredibly dangerous. I'd have to access classified systems from inside the Pentagon. If they catch me, I'm dead." "They're already killing people to protect this secret," typed back. "Doctor, probably others we don't know about. How many more have to die before we stop them?" Watched's face as she waited for response. Her expression was grim but determined, the look of someone who had accepted that there was no easy way out of their situation. "Give me 24 hours, finally replied. "I'll see what I can find, but you need to understand something. Even if we expose Operation Silent Sky, the people behind it won't just give up. They'll come after everyone involved with everything they have." "They're already doing that," replied. "At least this way we have a chance to stop them." "Where can I reach you if I find something?" asked. Gave him the frequency and encryption protocols for her improvised communication device, then signed off with a simple, "Stay alive, Jake." As the screen went dark, leaned back against the broken kitchen counter and closed her eyes. Could see the exhaustion and pain catching up with her as the adrenaline from their escape began to wear off. "You need medical attention for that shoulder," said, moving closer to examine her injury. "The dislocation was properly set, but you're probably dealing with significant soft tissue damage." Opened her eyes and looked at him. You know we can't go to a hospital or clinic. They'll be monitoring every medical facility in the region. I know, said, but I'm a doctor and this place might be hidden, but it probably has basic supplies. Let me see what I can do. Spent the next hour exploring the abandoned farmhouse and was surprised by what he found. The basement contained not just a working generator, but also a well-stocked medical kit that had been part of the safe house preparations. This unit had obviously planned for the possibility that they might need to treat injuries without access to professional medical facilities. The supplies were military-grade and well-preserved in sealed containers. Found antibiotics, pain medication, surgical instruments, and everything he would need to properly assess and treat injuries. Your unit was thorough, observed as he laid out medical supplies on a cleaned kitchen table. Jake was thorough, corrected. He always said that proper preparation was the difference between completing a mission and becoming a casualty. As cleaned and examined shoulder wound, he was impressed by her pain tolerance. She sat perfectly still while he worked, showing no signs of discomfort even when he had to manipulate the joint to check for additional damage. You know, when I first saw you in the hospital, I knew you had military training, said as he applied a proper dressing to her shoulder. But I had no idea I was treating someone who had been through what you've experienced. Was quiet for a moment. Most people in special operations learn to compartmentalize. You do your job, you follow orders, you trust that the people above you know what they're doing. It never occurred to me that I might be fighting for the wrong side. Had finished with her shoulder and was now checking the various cuts and bruises she had sustained in Prague. Most were superficial, but a few required careful cleaning and bandaging. For what it's worth, said, I think you're fighting for the right side now. As evening fell, they established a watch schedule and tried to get some rest. Insisted on taking the first watch despite her injuries, positioning herself by a window where she could observe the approach to the farmhouse. Tried to sleep on a makeshift bed in the back room, but found his mind racing with everything he had learned over the past 24 hours. Just before midnight, his communication device crackled to life. Was trying to contact them several hours earlier than expected. You there, appeared on the screen. Typed quickly, here, what did you find? More than I expected, replied. And it's worse than we thought. Operation Silent Sky has a timeline. They're planning to deploy binary storm within the next 72 hours. Felt his blood run cold as he read the message over shoulder. Where typed? Multiple targets, replied. New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. They want maximum casualties and media coverage. His hands trembled slightly as she typed her next question. How many people are we talking about? Potentially hundreds of thousands, replied. Binary storm is designed to spread through water supplies and air conditioning systems. Once deployed, it would be almost impossible to contain. Sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just about corruption or cover-ups anymore. They were looking at a plan for mass murder on an unprecedented scale. Jake, please tell me you found evidence we can use, typed. I did, replied. Financial records, communication logs, deployment schedules, everything we need to prove the conspiracy exists. But there's a problem. What kind of problem? Asked. The evidence is stored on a secure server in a classified facility. Getting it would require a physical infiltration mission, and the facility is Ridge. Went completely still when she read the location. Could see her face pale in the glow from the communication device screen. What's Ridge? Asked. Was quiet for a long moment before answering. It's where my unit was based. It's also where Operation Silent Sky is being coordinated from. Understood immediately. They want us to break into the most heavily defended facility in the conspiracy. It's the only way, his message continued. The evidence is on an air-gapped system that can only be accessed from inside the facility, and there's something else you need to know. What? Typed. Your old team leader, Commander Sarah, is running security for Operation Silent Sky. She knows you're alive, and she knows you have information about Prague. She's turned Ridge into a fortress specifically designed to capture or kill you if you show up. Stared at the screen for several minutes without responding. Could see the conflict in her expression as she processed this information about someone who had obviously been important to her. Sarah was my mentor, finally said to. She recruited me for the unit, trained me, saved my life more times than I can count. I trusted her completely. And now she's part of the conspiracy, said gently. Nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. Which means she knows exactly how I think, how I operate, what my strengths and weaknesses are. She turned back to the communication device and typed, "Jake, can you get me the current security protocols for Ridge?" "This is suicide," replied immediately. "Even if you could get inside, there's no way you could get out alive. They have an entire company of private military contractors guarding that place." "Send me the protocols anyway," typed. "And Jake, if I don't make contact again within 48 hours, release everything you found to every major news outlet simultaneously." "Don't do this," pleaded. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," replied. "Operation Silent Sky launches in 72 hours. This is the only chance we have to stop it." After reluctantly agreed to provide the security information, shut down the communication device, and turned to. Her expression was calm but determined, the look of someone who had accepted a mission that might be impossible. "You don't have to be part of this," said quietly. "You've already done more than enough. I can get you somewhere safe before I attempt the infiltration." Looked at her for a long moment, thinking about the hundreds of thousands of innocent people who would die if Operation Silent Sky succeeded. He thought about his oath as a doctor to do no harm, and realized that sometimes preventing harm required taking enormous risks. "How exactly were you planning to infiltrate a heavily defended military facility while injured and without backup?" asked. Almost smiled, very carefully. "That's not much of a plan," observed. "No, it's not," agreed, "but it's the only plan we have." Stood up and began organizing the remaining medical supplies. "Then we better make sure you're in the best possible condition before we attempt it." Looked at him with surprise. "You can't be serious about coming with me." "I'm very serious," replied. "You're going to need medical support if you get injured during the infiltration, and more importantly, you're going to need someone watching your back who isn't trained to think exactly like you do." Was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the dim light from the generator-powered bulb hanging overhead. "If we do this together, there's a very good chance we'll both die," said finally. "And if we don't do it, hundreds of thousands of innocent people will die," replied. "Some choices are easy even when they're difficult." Nodded slowly, accepting his decision. "Then we need to start planning, because infiltrating Ridge is going to require everything we have, and probably more than that." As they began planning what might be their final mission together, felt a strange sense of peace settling over him. His life as a trauma surgeon had been dedicated to saving lives one patient at a time. Now he had a chance to save hundreds of thousands of lives all at once. The odds were overwhelming, the enemy was better equipped and better positioned, and success seemed almost impossible. But sometimes, impossible missions were the only ones worth attempting. Outside the abandoned farmhouse, the Maryland countryside was quiet under a star-filled sky. Inside, two unlikely allies worked through the night, preparing for a mission that would either expose one of the most dangerous conspiracies in American history or cost them their lives in the attempt. Either way, realized, they were finally fighting for something that truly mattered. Dawn was breaking over the Virginia mountains when and reached the perimeter of Ridge. The classified facility was hidden in a valley surrounded by dense forest, accessible only by a single heavily guarded road that wound through several checkpoints. From their observation position on a ridge overlooking the compound, could see why had described the mission as nearly impossible. Ridge looked more like a small military base than a research facility. High concrete walls topped with razor wire surrounded multiple buildings, and could count at least 20 armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Surveillance towers equipped with advanced sensors covered every approach, and the facility's communication arrays suggested they had real-time connections to military and intelligence networks across the country. "Your commander wasn't taking any chances," observed, studying the facility through binoculars that had somehow acquired during their journey. "Sarah knows me better than anyone," replied grimly. "She knows I'm good at infiltration, so she set up defenses specifically designed to counter my capabilities." They had spent the previous 18 hours preparing for the mission with an intensity that reminded of his SEAL training days. Had transformed from an injured hospital patient into a focused special operations professional, planning every detail of their approach with methodical precision. The equipment they had gathered was an eclectic mix of military surplus, civilian electronics, and improvised tools that had crafted from materials scavenged during their journey. Was amazed by her ability to turn seemingly random objects into sophisticated infiltration gear. "Intelligence was accurate," said, pointing toward a building in the center of the compound. "That's the communications center where the evidence is stored. The server we need to access is on the 3rd floor, in a room that's isolated from all external networks." Studied the building through his binoculars. It was surrounded by open ground with no cover, overlooked by multiple guard towers, and appeared to have its own dedicated security team. "How exactly are we supposed to get inside there?" asked. Pointed to a drainage tunnel that ran under the facility's eastern wall. "According to the architectural plans provided, that tunnel connects to the facility's water treatment system. If we can access it from the outside, we should be able to move through the underground infrastructure." "Should be able to," repeated. "The plans are 15 years old," admitted. "There's no guarantee the tunnel system hasn't been modified or blocked since then." Lowered his binoculars and looked at. Despite her professional demeanor, he could see the tension in her shoulders and the way she favored her injured arm. The medical treatment he had provided had helped, but she was still dealing with significant physical limitations. "Are you sure you're physically capable of this?" asked. "Infiltrating a heavily defended facility would be challenging even if you were at full strength." Was quiet for a moment, testing the range of motion in her injured shoulder. "I have to be capable of it," she said finally, "because if we don't succeed, Operation Silent Sky launches tomorrow." The timeline was the most terrifying aspect of their situation. Latest intelligence indicated that the binary storm attacks were scheduled for rush hour the following morning, timed to maximize casualties and media impact. Even if they could somehow get evidence of the conspiracy to the media, there might not be enough time to prevent the attacks. "There's something else we need to consider," said. "Even if we successfully infiltrate the facility and obtain the evidence, how do we get it to people who can act on it? Is just one person working inside the Pentagon?" Had been thinking about the same problem. "I have contacts in investigative journalism, people who have exposed government corruption before. If we can get them solid evidence, they have the resources to break the story simultaneously across multiple platforms." "Assuming we survive long enough to contact them," pointed out. "That's why we're going in together," said. "You'll provide overwatch and medical support while I handle the technical aspects of the infiltration. If something goes wrong, one of us might still be able to complete the mission." They spent another hour observing the facility and refining their approach plan. Was impressed by tactical thinking, the way she identified weaknesses in the security perimeter and planned contingencies for various failure scenarios. This was someone who had survived years of dangerous operations by being more thorough and more prepared than her enemies. As they prepared to move to their insertion point, his communication device crackled to life with an urgent message from. "Major development," the message read. "I've identified the specific binary storm deployment teams. They're moving into position in the target cities as we speak." Typed quickly, "Can you provide locations?" "New York team is based in a warehouse in Queens," replied. "Los Angeles team is operating from a shipping container facility near the port. Chicago team is using a chemical plant as cover." Read the messages over shoulder, feeling a growing sense of urgency. Can local authorities stop these teams if they get the right information? "Not without proof of the conspiracy," replied. "The teams are using legitimate cover identities and have official documentation for their activities. Anyone trying to stop them without evidence would face federal charges." Stared at the communication device screen, clearly wrestling with an impossible decision. "Jake, how long would it take to get the evidence to the right people once we have it?" "If everything goes perfectly, 6 to 8 hours, replied. "But that assumes you can get the evidence out of Ridge alive, which is looking increasingly unlikely." Could see calculating odds and timelines, trying to find a solution to what appeared to be an unsolvable problem. Even if they successfully completed their mission, there might not be enough time to prevent the attacks. "There might be another option," said slowly, an idea forming as he studied the facility layout. "What if we don't try to get the evidence out? What if we broadcast it directly from inside the facility? Looked at him with interest. Explain. Pointed toward the communication arrays visible throughout the compound. Ridge has powerful transmission equipment for coordinating classified operations. If we could access their communication system, we might be able to send the evidence directly to media outlets and law enforcement agencies simultaneously. Considered the idea running through the tactical implications. That would mean staying inside the facility longer, increasing our exposure to discovery. But you're right, it might be our only chance to get the information out in time. She turned back to the communication device. Jake, would it be possible to access the evidence server and the main communication system from the same location? Let me check the facility schematics, replied. After several minutes, he responded with coordinates. Yes, but it would require accessing both the communications center and the server room, which are in different parts of the building. How far apart? Asked. 2 floors and about 300 meters of heavily monitored corridors, replied. This is getting more dangerous by the minute. Maybe we should consider other options. Shut down the communication device and turned to. He's right. What I'm proposing is extremely dangerous. We'd essentially be conducting 2 separate infiltrations of the most secure areas in the facility. Had been thinking about the tactical challenges, drawing on his own military experience to understand what they would be facing. What if we split up once we're inside? I handle the communication system while you get the evidence from the server. Shook her head immediately. You don't have the training for that kind of technical infiltration, and I can't risk you being captured or killed because of my mission. With respect, this stopped being just your mission the moment I decided to help you, replied. And you're forgetting something important. I do have technical training. 8 years as a SEAL medic included extensive work with communication systems and electronic warfare. Studied his face, clearly evaluating his capabilities and the risks involved in dividing their already minimal resources. If we split up, we lose our ability to provide mutual support, pointed out. If something goes wrong, we'd be facing the facility's security forces alone. But we'd also double our chances of completing at least part of the mission, countered. And right now, partial success might be enough to prevent hundreds of thousands of deaths. The decision hung between them as they prepared for what might be their final conversation. Could see weighing the tactical advantages against the personal cost of potentially losing someone she had come to trust and rely on. There's something else you should know before you make this decision, said quietly. Commander isn't just running security for Operation Silent Sky. According to intelligence, she's also the one who ordered execution and who's been coordinating the manhunt for me. Felt a chill as the implications hit him. She's not just a corrupt officer, she's become a war criminal. Nodded grimly, which means she'll do whatever it takes to stop us, including killing anyone who gets in her way. They spent the final hour before sunset reviewing their individual mission objectives and emergency procedures. Would infiltrate the communications center to access the evidence server, while would approach the main transmission facility to prepare for broadcasting the information once had retrieved it. Both understood that their chances of survival were minimal, but both also understood that failure would result in one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in American history, conducted by their own government against innocent civilians. As darkness fell over the Virginia mountains and made their way toward the drainage tunnel that would provide access to Ridge, they moved with the practiced stealth of special operations personnel, staying low and avoiding the sight lines of the facility's surveillance systems. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a concrete barrier about half a mile from the main facility. Had anticipated that it might be secured, but when they reached it, they discovered that the entrance was not only unguarded, but appeared to have been recently used. Fresh footprints in the mud suggested that someone else had accessed the tunnel system within the past few hours. That's not good, whispered as examined the tracks. Studied the footprints with professional interest. Military boots recent at least 3 people, they knew about this entrance. The implications were clear. Their infiltration route had been discovered, possibly compromised. But with less than 18 hours before Operation Silent Sky was scheduled to launch, they had no choice but to proceed. Tested the tunnel entrance and found it accessible. The passage was narrow and partially flooded, but it appeared to lead in the direction of the facility as indicated on architectural plans. Once we're inside the tunnel system, we'll be committed, said. No communication with the outside, no backup, and no easy way out if things go wrong. Checked his equipment one final time: medical supplies, communication gear, and the basic weapons had insisted he carry despite his preference for nonviolence. I want you to know that regardless of how this ends, working with you has been an honor, said. You're fighting for something that matters, and that makes all the difference. Looked at him with an expression that was part gratitude, part sadness, and part determination. If we don't both make it out of this, I want you to know that meeting you reminded me why I became a SEAL in the first place, to protect people who can't protect themselves. They entered the drainage tunnel together, moving through the darkness toward what awaited them inside Ridge. Behind them, the last light of sunset faded from the Virginia mountains. Ahead lay the most dangerous mission of their lives, with the lives of hundreds of thousands of innocent people hanging in the balance. The tunnel was exactly as challenging as had expected. Cold water reached their knees in some sections, and the concrete walls were slick with moisture and algae. But the passage was structurally sound and led steadily toward the facility. After 45 minutes of careful movement, they reached a junction where the tunnel connected to the facility's water treatment system. Used a small device to check for electronic surveillance, then carefully opened an access panel that led into the building's basement infrastructure. This is where we separate, whispered. Give me exactly 30 minutes to reach the communications center, then begin your approach to the transmission facility. Checked his watch and nodded. If you're not at the extraction point in 2 hours, I'll proceed with broadcasting whatever evidence I can gather independently. Squeezed his shoulder with her uninjured hand. Don't get yourself killed trying to be a hero. The world needs doctors like you. The world needs warriors like you too, replied. Stay alive. She disappeared into the darkness of the facility's infrastructure, moving with the silent precision of her special operations training. Waited exactly 30 minutes, listening to the sounds of the facility above him and preparing for what would either be the most important mission of his life or his final act as a human being. When his watch indicated it was time to move, began his own infiltration of Ridge, carrying with him the hopes of hundreds of thousands of innocent people who had no idea their lives hung in the balance of what two unlikely allies could accomplish in the next few hours. The facility above was filled with the sounds of normal nighttime operations guards walking their rounds, equipment humming, radio chatter from security teams. But underneath it all, could sense the tension of an organization preparing for something massive and terrible. Operation Silent Sky was less than 18 hours from launch, and the only thing standing between a terrorist attack of unprecedented scale and hundreds of thousands of innocent victims was a former SEAL medic and an injured Navy SEAL working separately in the darkness of the most heavily defended facility in the conspiracy. As moved through the basement infrastructure toward his objective, he said a quiet prayer for safety and success. Everything they had worked for, everything they had risked, would be decided in the next few hours. Either they would expose Operation Silent Sky and prevent a massacre, or they would die trying. But at least they would die knowing they had fought for something that mattered more than their own lives. The transmission facility was just ahead and could hear the electronic hum of powerful communication equipment. Soon, very soon, the world would learn the truth about Operation Silent Sky. If they lived long enough to tell it. Moved through the darkness of Ridge's infrastructure with practiced stealth, every sound amplified by the tension of knowing that discovery meant death. The facility's basement was a maze of pipes, electrical conduits, and maintenance tunnels that connected the various buildings in the complex. According to architectural plans, she needed to reach the 3rd floor of the communications center, a journey that would take her through the heart of the most secure military installation involved in Operation Silent Sky. As she navigated the basement tunnels, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The facility was too quiet, the security patrols too predictable, the access routes too convenient. After 12 years of special operations, she had developed an instinct for when missions felt like traps, and every alarm bell in her head was ringing. But with less than 18 hours before Binary Storm was deployed against innocent civilians, there was no choice but to proceed. Reached the service elevator that would take her to the upper floors, using electronic lockpicks to bypass the security system with techniques Jake had taught her years ago. The elevator rose silently through the building and checked her equipment one final time. In addition to her weapons and infiltration tools, she carried a specialized data extraction device that could copy the contents of the classified server in minutes. Everything depended on reaching that server room and downloading the evidence that would expose Operation Silent Sky. The third-floor corridor was dimly lit and appeared empty, but training told her that appearances could be deceiving. She moved along the wall, staying in the shadows and avoiding the sight lines of security cameras that she assumed were monitoring the area. The server room was exactly where Syntelligence had indicated, protected by an electronic lock that recognized from previous operations. She was halfway through bypassing the security system when she heard a sound that made her blood run cold, the distinctive click of a weapon being behind her. "Hello," said a familiar voice. "It's been a long time." Turned slowly to face Commander Sarah, the woman who had been her mentor, her leader, and someone she had once trusted with her life. Was exactly as remembered her, tall, confident, and radiating the kind of authority that came from years of successful command. But there was something different in her eyes now, a coldness that spoke of choices made and lines crossed. "Hello, Sarah," replied, keeping her voice steady despite the weapon pointed at her chest. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Stepped closer and could see other figures moving in the shadows behind her security personnel who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The trap had sensed was now springing shut around her. "Did you really think you could infiltrate Ridge without me knowing?" asked. "I trained you. I know every technique you use, every move you make. I've been tracking you since you entered the drainage tunnel." Realized that their entire infiltration had been anticipated and allowed to proceed. Had wanted her to get this far, probably to ensure that would be captured alive rather than killed during external surveillance. "Why, Sarah?" asked. "Why are you part of this? Operation Silent Sky is mass murder disguised as terrorism. How does that serve our country?" His expression hardened. "Our country is weak, divided, unfocused, unwilling to take the hard steps necessary to maintain our position in the world. Operation Silent Sky will provide the unity and resolve we need to face our real enemies." Felt sick listening to her former mentor justify the planned murder of hundreds of thousands of innocent Americans. "Those people in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago aren't enemies, Sarah. They're civilians, families, children. They're acceptable casualties in a larger war," replied coldly. "Sometimes leaders have to make difficult decisions for the greater good." Could see that truly believed what she was saying, which made her even more dangerous. This wasn't simple corruption or greed. This was ideological extremism that had consumed someone had once admired and respected. "Where's your partner?" asked, gesturing for her security team to search the area. "The doctor who helped you escape from Walter Reed. We know he's here with you." Forced herself to remain calm, knowing that life now depended on her ability to mislead about their mission plan. "He's not part of this operation. I left him at a safe house in Maryland." Studied's face, clearly trying to determine if she was lying. "You never were good at deception. Doctor is somewhere in this facility, and my people will find him. The only question is whether he'll be captured alive or shot resisting arrest." The mention of being shot sent a surge of fear through, but she forced herself to focus on the mission objective. Even captured and outnumbered, she might still be able to access the server if she could create enough distraction. "Sarah, before your people take me away, there's something I need to understand," said, slowly reaching toward her equipment pack. "How long has this conspiracy been active? How many operations like Prague have there been?" Relaxed slightly, apparently pleased to have an opportunity to explain the scope of what she considered a patriotic mission. "Operation Silent Sky has been in development for 3 years. Prague was just one of several acquisitions necessary to complete the Binary Storm program." His hand found the small explosive device she had prepared as a last resort. It wasn't powerful enough to cause serious structural damage, but it might provide the distraction she needed to reach the server room. "How many people have you killed to protect this secret?" asked, continuing to engage in conversation while preparing to act. "As many as necessary," replied. "Doctor, several journalists who were asking inconvenient questions, a few government officials who couldn't be trusted to maintain operational security." felt her anger building as casually described murdering innocent people, but she channeled that emotion into tactical focus. She had one chance to complete the mission, and it would require perfect timing. "I want you to know that this isn't personal," continued. "You're a good soldier who unfortunately discovered information you weren't supposed to have. In a different situation, you would have been valuable to our cause. In a different situation, I would have killed you myself for betraying everything we swore to defend," replied. His expression hardened again. "Secure her weapons and prepare her for transport," she ordered her security team. As the guards moved forward, activated the explosive device and threw it toward the far end of the corridor. The small blast filled the area with smoke and debris, providing exactly the distraction she needed. Moved with desperate speed, diving through the server room door while security team tried to regain them.